design where we look at the entire population of kids who have committed sex offenses and been caught, and we follow them up. In both juvenile and criminal justice records to look at the recidivism rates. And in multiple states, we find about less than a 3% sexual recidivism rate. 97 to 98% of the kids that sexually offend and get caught don't do it again. This is irrespective of whether they got treatment or anything else. They don't do it again. Now that's data based on Oregon and South Carolina for me, but my friend and colleague Michael Caldwell has taken 106 studies that looked at juvenile sex offense recidivism risk, 106 studies, more than 11,000 kids, and looked at the recidivism rate. And the average weighted mean recidivism across 5 years, and 5 years you pick up almost all recidivism events, is 2.75%. So again, we have, if desistance is the norm and the extreme norm, desistance is the norm, 97, 98% of these kids aren't going to do it again. Again, I would argue that that means we probably could have prevented most of them from doing it in the first place. If desistance is that common, then surely prevention can also be highly effective. So what should we focus on? If we know we need to focus on kids, and in particular kids before they reach age 14, but probably after they reach 10 or 11, because it has to be salient, this prevention of engaging younger kids in sex isn't relevant to very young children because they're not doing that. If we know we need to focus on 6th and 7th graders, 12 and 13-year-olds perhaps, what should we focus on? And there's not great research. There really hasn't been much of a focus in this area, but when we look at the available literature, these are some of the factors that it looks like we can both modify, they're dynamic risk factors, and should maybe focus on. So low sex knowledge, again. I ran one of the largest randomized controlled trials of kids who have engaged in harmful sexual behaviors treatment trial. And what we found is that often it was the case that they really didn't know what they were doing was wrong until they got caught. They may have known it shouldn't be public, but knowing that sex shouldn't be public is different than knowing that it's illegal or knowing that it can cause harm. So low sex knowledge, impulsivity, inadequate supervision, maybe some cognitions that support sex with kids. Again, if you don't know any better, cognitions that minimize culpability, which I would say are normative for kids. It's normative to minimize your own culpability and bad behavior. These are some of the things that we believe you can change and perhaps reduce the likelihood that an older child will engage a younger child in inappropriate or harmful sexual behaviors. And so we've developed a prevention intervention that we're just now starting to test. So I cannot tell you that this intervention works. I can tell you that our goal is to design and test the feasibility and some early indicators of success in a universal prevention program that targets 12 and 13-year-old kids and their parents. And we were careful in our language, careful in what we called it. We call it responsible behavior with younger children. We don't call it preventing sexual abuse of younger children because we didn't think that would fly, and we didn't think that that really put the emphasis where it needed to be. This is about responsible behavior with younger children. These are my colleagues and my co-investigators, Dr. Cindy Schaefer and Dr. Catherine Bradshaw, both well respected in their fields. And then, as Jenny mentioned in her introduction of me, this is a study that's funded by the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development at NIH. This project will proceed in 3 phases. The first is we're going to hold focus groups separately with educators, parents, and students. And the idea there is to present the content of our intervention and make sure that it seems salient to those 3 stakeholder groups, that it seems relevant, that we're not missing something important, and that there's nothing particularly off-putting about this. As you might imagine, one concern is how do you get parents and educators on board with an idea of keeping kids from touching younger kids in a sexual way. That's a kind of an icky topic. But educators and parents right now are dealing with sexting, online access to sexually abusive images of children, online access to just regular pornography, violent and sexually suggestive video. So they deal with this all the time, and they have, the schools actually have approached us for help, and so I think the time is right for this kind of a focus. So that's phase one, and then we'll in phase two, we're going to do something called rapid prototyping, which is where you take a piece of your module. There'll be 8 modules, we think. You take a piece of it and you deliver it to some 7th graders, and you get their immediate feedback, what works, what needs work. You get it from the students and you get it from the teacher. And then you can make a change and present it to the next 7th grade class in a different school with the change. And in this way, very, very quickly shape up your intervention so it doesn't take 5 years. And then the third phase of the study will be a small randomized control trial. We've got 2 schools that will get randomized to receive the intervention by an interventionist, 2 that will be waitlisted that will receive it the following year. And we'll measure outcomes before we deliver the intervention, at immediate post-test, and 6 months later. And this is the logic model that explained to NIH at least what we thought we'd be doing. First, developing the intervention, trying to get feedback quickly, delivering it in this small randomized trial. And then the goal is increasing knowledge and increasing knowledge about developmental differences. Why am I, as a 12-year-old, different than an 8-year-old? Why is it not okay for me to involve an 8-year-old in sexual behavior? Some increased empathy. We're supposed to take care of younger kids. We protect younger kids. We are kind to younger kids, and part of that is we don't involve younger kids in sexual behavior because they're not ready for it. Even if they're running around naked, they're not ready for sex. Even if they come and sit in our lap, they're not ready for sex. Even if they seem to be ready for sex, they're not ready for sex. And then also looking at increased knowledge of child sexual abuse. These are some of the the immediate outcomes that we're hoping to achieve. With parents, we want to get them talking more about what are the rules in our family about sex. Why is it not okay to engage younger children in sex? If you're babysitting, what are the rules for when you're babysitting? And making overt what we already believe to be happening through covert means. We really, truly believe that I think 12 and 13-year-olds know better than to do this, and I would posit that many of them don't. So getting parents to make that very overt, but with explicit rules against sexual touching of younger kids, and then ultimately to see, does this actually reduce the likelihood that older kids will touch younger kids in a sexual way? To measure that ultimate outcome, because of mandatory reporting laws, that's a conflict, right? Like, you can't ask a kid if he's touched a younger kid in a sexual way and then call the police on him as part of a research project. The NIH has indicated that they might be willing to give us a certificate of confidentiality, and so we in fact have a measure, a well-validated measure of kids' sexual behavior, very explicit sexual behavior with younger kids, that we believe we're going to be allowed to use in this study. And to my knowledge, it'd be the first time where older kids have been asked about their sexual behavior with younger kids in a systematic way. If we can't ask those questions, we're never going to know if it works. So I'm really hoping we get that certificate. These are the modules. As I said, it can change because we haven't done it yet. But we think there's going to be 8 modules. These are the first 4. And each module that has got a P in parentheses next to it has got a parent component. And it's a parent-led homework assignment that the kid will take home and get some little reinforcements for bringing back into the school. The first several just sort of talk. The first several sessions, these will be 20, 30-minute sessions probably, will touch on developmental differences between older and younger kids, empathy by older kids for younger kids. But then in the fourth session, we're going to dive right into why we don't involve younger kids in sexual behavior. We'll use very clear language, touching penises, touching vaginas, having them touch our penis, having them touch our vagina, so that there's not any question about what we're talking about, and we're not going to use euphemisms. And then why this occurs, what are the situations. When kids involve younger kids in sexual behavior, it's often in situations of convenience. They're babysitting, they're not being monitored by adults. And so how to identify situations where it might be more likely to happen, what to do if it is happening, how to effectively report this. We'll include one module for peer-on-peer sexual violence. This is not a peer-on-peer sexual violence intervention. We don't anticipate that one module will do anything. This seemed like a good engagement strategy. The schools are very concerned about peer-on-peer sexual violence. This is one way to begin to address that, but we're designing this intervention specifically so it can be integrated with other existing interventions, either other existing interventions like the ones that I mentioned earlier, other existing behavioral interventions like anti-bullying interventions, or as a standalone that can be delivered as its own health curricula. But we understand the burdens that are placed on educators and recognize that we can't have a separate intervention for every single behavioral concern that we have. So we need to design these in ways that they can be integrated. And we've begun talking with the folks who have developed the Shifting Boundaries to see if they might be interested in braiding in some of our content into theirs. It's entirely possible that if you talk to kids about peer-on-peer sexual violence, it has an effect on younger kid, or older kid, younger kid, but nobody's ever measured that. And Bruce, bless him, actually said, I never thought of that. And it's hard to do. You have to have waivers to be able to do that kind of thing, to be able to ask kids about those behaviors. Anyway, so we include one module, and then we have a wrap-up. So moving forward, this is just one example. At the Moore Center, we have 2 other primary prevention interventions in development, another one that targets adolescents and one that targets parents. There's much more we can do. We can really start to look at at situational prevention. How can we design buildings to make it less likely that these behaviors will happen? Most sexual abuse occurs within a home, the home of the perpetrator or the home of the victim. But some of it certainly doesn't occur at institutions, as we all know. And are there things we can do about the physical properties? Putting windows and doors, making sure that if there is one-on-one contact between older people and younger people, it's easily observable and interruptible. Are there policies and procedures and practices we can put into place to reduce this? I think there are. I hope that the work that we do contributes to that, but ultimately what we really need is a lot of people doing this work. It's fabulous that Jenny got that capstone grant, and I know that this is going to be one of the places that really moves forward hard on primary prevention and universal prevention programming. We really need the public, and we really need policymakers who reflect the public to understand that child sexual abuse is a preventable public health problem, and as such, it needs to be resourced. We've put a lot of funds quite effectively into the prevention of child physical abuse, the prevention of child neglect, the prevention of bullying, and we need to also put that kind of attention into the prevention of child sexual abuse. So that's it, and thank you very much.
Okay, before our break, we have time for someone to come to a microphone, and Elizabeth will address a quick question. So if someone has something that they'd like to step up to the microphone for, we would love to have that at this point. Okay, here we go.
Hi. I was wondering if there's any evidence of the effects of comprehensive sexual education on peer-on-peer victimization or younger peer victimization.
So my understanding of the literature on comprehensive sex education is that I don't know that it has been looked at. I don't know that the outcome of peer sexual violence is something that has been looked at as an outcome of comprehensive sex education. I do know that things that have been looked at are things like, does it increase the likelihood that kids will engage in sex? This hasn't been found. Does it increase the likelihood that kids will use protection when they have sex? And it looks like that is an outcome of good comprehensive sex education. But for the most part, And David and Mary and Jenny can correct me if I'm wrong. For the most part, we've had very siloed fields where we talk about healthy sexual development and sex education on the one hand, and sexual offending on the other hand. And I think that's part and parcel because we think of people as sex offenders and not as sixth graders or seventh graders or eighth graders. We are beginning to see, great increase in preventing college-based sex offending, which is fantastic, and recognizing that by the time kids get to college, that we may have missed a lot of opportunities there. And so, weaving healthy sexual messages that include I'm not aware of any program that talks about sex with younger kids as part of that messaging, but ultimately, I think that's where we'd like to be. That we are able to address a lot of topics, topics more effectively. Is there a way we can reach out to kids who might actually be attracted to younger kids in a way that's not stigmatizing and not pejorative, as part of kind of a healthy understanding that people are born with their interests, and many would experience an interest in young children as an unwanted sexual interest, and can we reach out to them for help? Or can we give them avenues to reach out for help as part of standard curricula? But I'd say that's probably a little ways away. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
We have time for one more question if anyone wants to jump up. Okay, I have a question for the audience then. For all of you who are working in schools, raise your hand if you're aware of a healthy sexuality or sex education that's offered in your curriculum. Okay, not too many, but some. Keep your hands up.
It's a multi-part question.
Keep them up if you feel like you're satisfied with it, or if you feel like it's comprehensive enough.
Yeah.
Some hands went down, some shrugs. We do have formats. We do have some mandates for sex education in our schools, and there's an opportunity to leverage that into more evidence-based and more focused sex education. So more on that to come, but it's interesting to me how many of you have those in your schools, and then the satisfaction of those from your perspective as educators. So more on that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
So much. Okay, we have coffee. Use the bathroom. Somebody save me a place in line in the bathroom, and we'll come back here at 10:45. We'll reconvene. Thank you.